I tried this year that I think actually I went to Italy to the slow food Terra Madre thing a few years ago, and they have this, as well as the kind of conference thing, they have this huge food fair going on, and I was looking at this stand where they were tasting beans. They were kind of little haricot beans, and there was a little spiel on the wall which was in English as well, saying that these beans grow at very high altitude in Italy, and they're places where they're the tastiest beans in Italy and everything, and I tasted them and they really were nice. So I said to the guy, I'll have a packet of them, like a little, pound or half kilo of beans, and I gave him €10, and he was chatting away to me in Italian, and I was saying, yes, that's very nice, and I hope you have a nice day too. And he was like, no, actually, I'm trying to tell you something really important here. And I was going, oh yeah, can I have my change now from my tenner? And then eventually he said, oh, sure, go away. And then I was sort of thinking about it afterwards and what he'd said, and then what I realised was that he was saying to me, the beans were €11 a half kilo, and the tenner wasn't enough. And this is what he was trying to explain to me, and obviously thought, oh shit, that's not what I'm saying, go on away, And so I thought, they must be really good, these beans, if they can initially, they can get €10 a half kilo for them. And last year I meant to plant them, and I went away on holidays in June, and I came back on the 20th of June, and I thought, oh, I never planted those beans. And I went out and I planted them in the ground on the 20th of June, and they made a fantastic crop of dried beans. And I thought, actually, I'd grow them again, for a staple, because another black cocoa bean that the American seed savers gave me, it also made a good crop outside, planted in June.
For drying?
For drying,
okay. Yeah. And you just rehydrate that as if you're buying a packet?
Yeah. And again, it's something that you can do in a garden scale that will give you a significant amount of calories, because most of the things we grow in the garden, you wouldn't get fat on.
Yeah.
You wouldn't.
That's right.
Well, apart from potatoes, I mean, your carrots and parsnips and things, you have a certain amount of calories in them. But a lot of what you grow in the garden, you still have to add the bread or the pasta or the meat to it to actually have a full meal. And I think these beans and the maize could be quite useful as...
Would you need to be growing an awful lot of them in terms of area to get enough for the year for drying?
No, I haven't got any figures on me, but I do have figures of how many pounds I got off a few square yards.
Right, okay.
And one thing actually that you would get the most weight per square yard, I think, would be something like the Irish green pea. It's a heritage Irish pea, very reliable, because again it's short season. And last year was horrible. In July when I was trying to harvest peas for seed, it was horrible and wet, and half of them went mouldy, and it was a nightmare trying to get peas for seed dry. But the Irish green peas, she knows everything now. The Irish green pea dried off really nicely, and it just shows you that somebody worked it out. Generations of people worked out what would work here.
And again, that's as a dried crop.
And as a dry pea.
So you just leave it dry on the vine and then and then use it, rehydrate it for use.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you dry them somewhere special, or do you leave them drying where they're growing?
Well, I tend to, once you see the pea, the bottom, obviously they sort of mature from the bottom up. The first pods are maturing and going brown, and the top ones are still flowering. And the best peas are the first ones that mature. They're the biggest peas. So as soon as I see the bottom seeds looking like they're going to fall out soon, or even if they have started to fall out, then I harvest the whole lot and toss it in the hay barn usually for a while, or in the polytunnel. I mean, the polytunnel can be a bit too hot for them, depending on the weather. The hay barn in the middle of the summer is fine. They dry away nicely, just tossed in the shed. And then when you have time, I usually have teenagers actually to come pull the pods off the plants, and then we pod them by hand. But I mean, and that's fine if you were doing like, what would I get? Some of the patches I did were like 3 or 4 square yards, I suppose, and you'd get maybe 2 or 3 kilos of seed. But that's quite a lot of food, When you think how many bags of beans do you actually buy in the health food shop and cook? I mean, you get a dinner for 4 or 6 people out of a pound of beans or peas, along with the other things. But it's a significant amount of food. You'd get a good few dinners off of, a bed.
Yeah. And in terms of, I don't know if I'm diverting you from main subject or not.
No.
In terms of layout, I mean, whether raised beds or rows or, you know, blocks of plants, all that kind of thing. Have you a preference for a garden layout personally?
I like beds that are about 4 foot wide. Well, maybe 3 foot wide and a foot wide bed, you know.
And would you go in rows or in blocks of
Well,
different vegetables?
I'd have, well, depending what it was, I'd have it I'd have a bed of, you know, 4 foot bed of whatever it is, and there might be a different number of rows in it depending what it was.
I suppose in terms of hoeing and things like that, because I generally plant within raised beds, kind of in blocks.
Yeah, in blocks, yeah.
Where a hoe just doesn't fit. So I just go away by hand.
Yeah,
when
yeah,
that's been
yeah.
done. And you know, there's no digging, so they're not being.
Well, I have one of these swivel hoes about this wide.
Okay.
And so for things like carrots, onions, I would grow them about 6 or 8 inches wide, so I can just get that hoe between them. And I would tend to plant them in Jean-Gilles Bon style, you know, in a grid, so that I can put the hoe through this way, and then I can go around and put the hoe through this way, and then then you might have to pull a few bits out by hand, but what I tend to do is use bits of string in the garden, because it is actually really handy to have straight lines. I have apple trees in my current vegetable garden. They're quite small, and when I prune the apple trees, I cut up all the prunings into row markers and leave them around the place. So you can tie a piece of string, you can have lots of, and have bits of baler twine wrapped around sticks around the place. And when I plant something out, or when I make up a bed, I actually make it straight, because it actually works better for me to have things in straight lines when you go hoeing. But I tend to do, well, different things, like peas in a 4 foot bed I would do 2 rows. And peas always need to be supported. And I haven't worked out the ideal support system yet. I do different supports for different types of peas, obviously. I had a wonderful pea that I got from the Heritage Seed Library last year, and I hope I'll have it on the catalogue next year, which is called Poppet, and it needs hardly any support. And it's all tendrils, and all the peas are held on the top of it, and I really liked it because you could see the pods, because there's no leaves hardly, and they just grew in a block, kind of. I did stick a few sticks between them, but not much in the way of strings, and they just grew into this block, and you could pick the peas off the top. Again, a 4 foot bed is handy because you can walk up on either side of it and pick the peas without having to walk on the bed much. I hate walking on my beds. If I don't, you know, especially if it's wet.
And 2 rows would be as much as they put in?
Of peas, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because they go mad, peas.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to get to them to pick them.
Right, okay.
Carrots I'd probably put 4 rows in a bed. Or onions I'd put 4 rows, 5 maybe even.
Do you try any companion planting?
I don't really know.
Yeah,
No.
I've tried desperately for years now onions with carrots, because the smell of the onions is meant to fend off the carrot
Doesn't
plant.
work.
It doesn't
Doesn't work. Doesn't work on my carrot flies. We sent a particularly vile, nasty carrot fly down where I am anyway, that even seems to get through carrot net sometimes. Well, it doesn't help that the dog runs over it and makes holes in it. But, yeah, I think the only thing for carrot fly is a net. But sometimes you get away with it. If you're a new garden and no one's grown carrots near you, you'll get away with it for a while.
Yeah.
Until you don't.
Do you want to look at seeds?
Yeah.
Yeah.